Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and I was spending a little bit of time on the 8chan board tonight, and I came across this discussion. I thought it was kind of interesting, and I thought I'd bring it to you, and you can toss in your comments down below. This was a post by Q where he gave us this video that he has given us many times, the speech that will get Donald Trump elected. Then he says, "This is not another 4-year election. Listen very carefully. Power returned to the people. Long-term solutions. Panic. Q." Now, in response to that, a lot of the Anons went to watch the video again, and then they looked at it. We're trying to find all the gems in it that are in there. It takes time to process it all and to see what parts are most important to Q, which is going to affect all of us. And here he highlighted this is not another 4-year election. And so if you listen to the first part of this speech, you'll get a feel for that.
Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people.
So did you catch that? Trump was not running as president to continue our established government. He was running to replace the government, the failed government. Now, this doesn't mean that he's going to become a dictator. Please don't take that as what he's saying. It's not at all. It is taking the government and putting it back in the hands of we the people. The problem we have is that it has grown in such ways that the government we have now is no longer in the hands of we the people. And something has to be done if that's what we're going to be. It has to change, and not just a little bit. It's going to have to change radically. Now remember, we're talking a lot of people in our government are going to be arrested. This is going to be huge. This is not something that is just another 4 years of a president. This is going to be transformative. And this is something that I think maybe a lot of Anons even don't wrap their brains around, because they haven't really considered the massive amount of change this is about to bring. Now, I've thought about it sometimes, and it kind of gives me a chill. But I also know that we can't keep going the way we are. Our government is so corrupt, and we're just finding out a little bit of it. Wait until it all starts to come out, and we see just what they all have been participating in. If I recall correctly, Q said 70% of our government could be arrested. 70%. That's a lot. When the Anons saw this, they thought it through, and they started thinking about, okay, so what does happen after all of these arrests that we're anticipating, because we have to have the corruption stopped. So this Anon says, in response to Q's post, "I see, so the plan will ultimately build a new form of government. I suspected as much and advocated for a revisioning of the Constitution years ago. Kinda gives me the willies. Even if I was not the source of the ideas, still kind of unreal to see so much be put in place as I'd seen it." For those just catching up, Q keeps posting this video for several reasons, but the one he highlights relates to something I said earlier this morning in regard to Q as a mantle superhero. Trump says it in the very beginning. Our movement is about replacing this corrupt system with one controlled by you, the American people. This is hinted at in Q's constitutional crisis idea. Pick somewhat related and connected with the notable regarding DDG 78 from a bread off the current notables list. I don't know what he means there. And the picture up here is kind of hard to see, but it's like a book turned sideways. And it's about the USS Porter. I don't know the significance of that. I'm not aware of the story of the USS Porter. But anyway, so he goes on, and I don't know what DDG 78 means. All I could think was DuckDuckGo, and I don't think that's it. The constitutional crisis unfolding is like nothing else humanity has ever seen. The freedom of the press from government intervention has now reached a point of being capable of interfering in the concept of a free and fair election. When algorithms can be tailored to try and flood you with information to construct a reality for you, there is a serious constitutional problem, not to mention an existential threat to society itself. We are going to uncover the limits of our current law and the vulnerabilities that have been exploited. The only way I can see, after D-Class, to truly move forward is nothing short of a constitutional convention. Q and team may have a very solid plan for how to go about this so as not to induce panic, but simply nothing can be the same. It's not just another 4-year election. Dare I even suggest that the national government will be deconstructed and the federal government, relation between states, will be facilitated by the military until such a time as a new national framework can be built and put in place. It's simply that bad up there. Not a military coup per se, but everyone has been convicted of some manner of high crime and misdemeanor, resigned, or been executed for treason, and don't really have a due process for what happens next. But the military is a national power capable of mediating the discussion of what we do next. It might not be that dramatic, but once society at large has the proof of much of what has been going on right in front of them, how they are being herded by Facebook, Google, etc., not just a revelation of the technologies, but transcripts of their chats among each other and how these people spoke of the common man, there's simply no way this all remains the same. A complete restructuring of the government, of who the military reports to and under what contexts, rogue spec war and out-of-control foreign policy, how people are represented at national levels of government. If we even have anything remotely similar to what we understand as a national government. Compound this with the Marines' tweet about learning in Notables, and I don't know what that one is either, and how Mattis talks about the importance of reading the works of history. The enemy we face is nothing new. The Lilliputians of Gulliver's Travels were echoes of what Cicero railed against millennia prior, and one could argue the prophets of the Bible even before he, and so much more. We have stood on the works of those prior, learned new lessons, and added to the design or refined it into new materials to keep it as the state of the art. So this is what he had to say. And the Anons responded. This one said, Mark Levin has been stumping for a state constitutional convention for years, even wrote a book about 11 amendments that need to be implemented. This one talks about thoughtful post-Anon, but I have to disagree. The Great Awakening cannot depend upon a new set of laws, even constitutional ones. It depends upon just what it says, an awakening of the human spirit, which will usher in a worldwide order where good prevails over evil, the exact opposite of what we've had till now. Then only simple laws will be needed, guided by common sense and justice. This one says, there is no constitutional crisis. Patriots in control of executive, the Senate, and now the Supreme Court. We're past needing the Congress. Full control. Investigations are running their course. Now comes the pain. So he's not buying this. Term limits, 1 6-year term in the Senate, 3 2-year terms in the House. You cannot serve in the House and then move to the Senate. Must take a 3-year break in between and return to your state. Must take your staff with you. Cannot become a lobbyist. Some good ideas. The problem is not too little government intervention in the free press, but secret government control and near monopoly of the press, with this social justice warrior Marxist working on eliminating freedom of speech completely via bogus hate speech laws. A constitutional convention might help or make things worse, depending what direction things take. End the Fed, the CIA, end income tax and most regulations, while adding just some new to control corporate monopolies, and that would be great. You must also work in the private sector for 10 years after you are out of school before you can run for office. No dual citizenship. Only 20% of the House of Representatives can be lawyers. We want people from all walks of life to serve. Some interesting ideas. I think you would have a little bit of a problem because how are people supposed to make a living if they work in Congress for 6 years and then they have to take 3 years off? What are they going to get a job working at McDonald's? I mean, it would be hard to get a job for only 3 years. And then if you want to go back to the Senate, again, another 6 years, it's just really hard to make a living doing that. And I think it would be very difficult to get people who would want to serve under those conditions. But I do think term limits are important. So I think there's got to be some kind of balance that we could have. This Anon responded, that was the post that this Anon was responding to, and he was talking about this Anon. Just listen to POTUS speech again and notice something I have never heard in the opening sentence. Our movement is about replacing a failed political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people. A new government? Whoa, what new government? What does that mean, Mr. President? Well, that's what they're talking about. After these abuses come to light, there is no way that the government can remain the same. There is simply too much that must be parsed through. The government processes were envisioned before the internet. Representation and other such things were used as a necessity that the internet has potentially eliminated. It won't be a complete abandonment of the Constitution, but the world has changed a lot since then, and we have a lot more experience as a global power to rival the East India Company in Britain. So there are lessons that need to be distilled into new processes. I argue, at least. Further, at the very least, the current establishment is so monstrous and out of control that the only real way to fix it, in any event, is to more or less shut down the national government and reconvene the federal government, the many states, under the military as a mediator. I think people really do not understand how insane things have gotten at the national level. Even most Anons. Consider, the principle of the rule of law is that you know the laws of your society before you do anything. If you are accused of committing a crime, you know before you ever get into the courtroom whether or not you are guilty of breaking the law. How many cases are built today on judicial precedent? Unless you are aware of case law, you have no idea whether or not you've broken a law before you get into court. This type of legislation from the bench is all over at the national level. We are at the point where judges are ruling on cases they should not have the authority to review in the first place. Lower national courts setting precedent for sweeping rulings to be found in circuit courts. It's absurd. It's not how things are supposed to work. So those are a couple of thoughts that the Anons had about what will happen after all the arrests. I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that the Q team said long-term solutions. So they have thought it out. It's not like this is something that they have just said, well, we're going to take care of all these arrests and we don't care what happens afterwards. No, they've already planned for this as well. This is all part of the planning that they're doing. So I just wanted to bring this to you and let you see what's going on, some of the chatter. It is something to think about. I know we've been so focused on, yes, we want all these arrests, but we all need to be thinking, too, about how that's going to affect our current federal government. Once this corruption is exposed and people see just how vast it is, remember 70%, that's a lot. When people see the magnitude of it, I think there's going to have to be some kind of change. And whether it's a constitutional convention, I don't know. But there's going to have to be something happen to readjust our current constitution, to close a lot of loopholes that we have, and to restructure things so this never happens again. There are just too many ways they got around the Constitution. So we're going to have to plug up those holes so we don't have a deep state come back in again. Because it does no good if you get rid of them all only to allow them back in. They'll take advantage of the same loopholes they did before. That's how they got so entrenched. So we've got to make sure that those loopholes are closed and they cannot use those things to take over the government again. This is going to require some major changes. I think sometimes we get so focused on all the arrests that we forget about what's going to happen after the arrests. So maybe a little bit of thought in that direction. I don't want anybody being scared about it. Our military is very good at planning things, and they're going to be there to help smooth these things out. There will be some good, honest politicians left. And those are the ones who will be able to step forward and help us rebuild and restructure our entire government so that it works better, more efficiently, and more to the times we're in. Because, like the one Anon said, we are in a time where the internet has brought a lot of changes. Some of the things they incorporated into our government when they were setting it up, they did out of necessity because you couldn't all be there all the time. But now we have planes and people can fly easily back to their home state or come back to DC, and they can be on the internet. They can use these tools to get information out to the people. So I think we're going to have to see a lot of changes after the arrests happen. We're definitely going to have some changes in our media and how that's structured, because if we don't change it, again, how are we going to stop them from doing exactly the same thing again? We can't unless we make some changes to make sure that doesn't happen anymore, that they cannot come back. Because this global elite, their whole thing is power, and they're not going to give it up very easily. And even with everything that the Q team is doing and Trump, it's not going to clear them out 100%. So be aware of that. They will come back. And as a Bible-believing Christian, I think they're going to come back and they will take over the world, because there won't be a Trump to stop them at that point. But I do believe that's what's going to happen, and I think I'm one of those that believes that's going to be the 7-year tribulation when they take over and they rule the entire world. That's my personal belief, and whether you believe that or not, that's totally up to you. I'm not going to fight people on it. Let's just wait and see what happens. But I wanted to present this to you and get you to thinking a little bit about not just the arrest, because I know we're all so focused on that, but there's going to be a lot that happens after the arrest. I also want you to think about your friends or relatives who are liberals or who may have been only watching like the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, all of those. They read in the New York Times maybe, or Washington Post, or Huffington Post, or Mother Jones, and that's where they get their news. So if that's where they're getting their news, I want you to consider what it's going to be like for them, because their world is about to be turned upside down. I don't normally watch much of MSNBC or CNN because it's just so painful to do, but I try to do it once in a while so I can see where their narrative is going. And it amazes me every time. The story they're telling people is so contrary to the truth. If you've got some liberal friends, ask them if they know who Peter Strzok and Lisa Page are, because a lot of them have never even heard of them. And those who have dismiss their texts. So ask them, have you read the texts? Yeah, and more of them are coming out, because those were just the tip of the iceberg. So there's a lot more. But their concept of reality is just about ready to be shattered. And we need to have compassion for them, because many of them genuinely believe what they've been told. They have good hearts, but they have been misled. So we need to be there for them when all of this happens so that we can help support them and help ease them into the transition. Most of us had a period of time that we went through when we woke up. And sometimes that was a brutal awakening, and sometimes it was a little easier. But usually there's this time period after you start to wake up going, wow, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I don't know what's reality. And I think a lot of them are going to go through that, because look at how much trouble many of them had getting over the idea that Hillary lost. They couldn't hardly handle that concept. So I want you to be compassionate when this happens, because they are going to be devastated and it's going to be hard for them to accept the truth. But if you're there for them, comfort them and encourage them and help them understand what's really going on and what the real truth is. Because this is all about the American people. We the people. And we the people can't turn our backs on half of our population just because they've been misled. We need to make sure to embrace them and to support them and help them understand what's happened because they're not going to know. So please take time, think through that, and maybe think a little bit about what it's going to be like once these trials begin. I mean, something's going to have to be done about the government. So it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say down below in the comments. What do you think's going to happen? Do you have any solutions? Do you have any ideas like the Anons who were saying they had to have term limits and this and that? You know, what would be your solution to fix the problems we have with our current corrupted government? How can we stop it from becoming corrupted again? What are we going to have to enact to keep that from happening? So that's what I've got for you. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.